I want you to have a think about the following figures and what they represent. So we've got -3%, -2%, 1%, and 1.3%. Now, these are the global declines or very small year-on-year growth that we're expected to see across your traditional TV revenue lines throughout 2025 globally. But what's driving the growth in the audiovisual sector is, of course, streaming. So you'll all be glad to hear that. Video on demand and fast advertising revenue is set to grow by a further 10% this year. Now, that includes advertising on ad-funded video on demand platforms, AVODs, broadcaster video on demand platforms, BVODs. It includes fast channels, free ad-supported streaming television. And then, of course, we all need a new acronym, so HVODs, hybrid video on demand services, and that would be Discovery Plus, Netflix, those who have a subscription, and also are now introducing ad tiers. Now, that increase is due to some new entrants into the market, but it's also due to some really exciting innovations within the connected TV or CTV space. So some newer ad formats and also some new ad space on your TV screens. So here today, I'm joined by our panelists who are going to dive into some of the trends that we're seeing on these trends and connected TV. So without further ado, I need to reorder my panelist list. That's okay. Starting next to me and moving along, we've got Caroline Manning, Head of Communications Design at Initiative. So Caroline is responsible for driving excellence in planning to deliver campaigns that really stand out, and also incorporating data-driven targeting to ensure her clients are actually targeting the audiences that they're in need of. Next up, we've got Chris Kleinschmidt, VP Connected TV Ad Sales at TiVo. And Chris is responsible for the monetization of the newly launched TiVo OS across EMEA. Next up, Katie Coteman, Group VP, Head of Ad Sales and Partnerships, Warner Brothers Discovery UK and Ireland. Now, Katie is responsible for managing ad sales and therefore generating all revenue across Warner Brothers Discovery's extensive portfolio of 20 linear channels, their social platforms, and of course, the streaming service Discovery Plus. We've then got Ryan Afshar, VP Publishers and Platforms at LG Ad Solutions. So at LG Ad Solutions, Ryan leads strategic partnerships with connected TV publishers and programmatic platforms across international markets. And last but not least, we've got John Waite, Global Managing Director, Global Head of Media Planning and Activation at Havas Media Group. So John is responsible for planning and activation strategies, but also agency product and capability development across all of the media channels at Havas Media Group. Very lengthy introduction, but please join me in welcoming our panelists. So, to warm up everyone else's voices, I thought I'd start with a quick fire question. So if I start with you, Caroline, we can move across. In one word or a very, very short sentence, what is your view as to why ad budgets are not shifting to connected TV as fast as audiences are?
I would say, okay, I'm going to say 3 words, so I'm going to bend the rules.
Yep.
Measurement and cost.
I'm going to not make some friends with this comment. Agency trading agreements.
Oh.
Yeah, I would say measurement, but also scale.
Which one was sure here? We have to think something different. No, similar to Chris's, I would say legacy buying methods and habits.
I've got the worst one being on the end. So more than 3 words, but you have to understand, to grow CTV, that money has to come from somewhere else, which means proving the incremental effect it's going to have on top of the stuff you're already buying, why it's better, why it's more cost effective, and ultimately, is a good point, trading agreements, like the legacy trading practices that restrict spend into other platforms.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll touch on a few of those throughout this session, but first, cost. So costs came up quite a lot when talking about connected TV, and in a number of different ways, but primarily it's around advertisers' view that CPMs on connected TV seem to be a lot higher than maybe what brands are used to on linear television or social platforms. So Caroline, how have you been addressing that with your brand clients?
So I had this kind of very question come to us as an agency by a client where they said, And they were a client that invested heavily into econometrics. And they said, looking at our CPTs on linear, then through to our econometric results, linear pays back far more. However, when we look at this over a period of years, what buying the same amount of TVRs 3 years ago is getting us a smaller reach today. We could invest on BVOD, VOD, SVOD, etc., but that carries higher CPTs and the payback on MMM is less. So how do we navigate this? And I think the answer became one around short-term and long-term, and it also became one about audiences. And my view on it is, there's a balance in that to be found, because if you invest in linear, you're helping yourself in the short term, but you're not helping yourself in the long term. Arguably, those audiences that are streaming more do tend to skew younger. Linear, we know, skews older. So you're not future-proofing your brand from that perspective. And because you're not future-proofing your brand, you're just kind of kicking the can down the road in terms of that cost coming later on. Whereas if you kind of take the hit and go, I'm accepting it might cost a little bit more in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to provide a long-term effect for my brand. So it's going to give me a longer payback, and it's going to make my brand more appealing to these younger consumers who hopefully are going to come into my brand and have a longer lifetime value. And so actually, for me, the answer's around short-term, long-term, and payback, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. So future-proofing is really the key point there.
Yeah.
Ryan, what are your views on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Caroline. I think when we look at where are the budgets coming from, or what's more cost effective, it really does depend on the strategy of the brand. What are the objectives? Well, not just looking at a cost per thousand, but actually, is it delivering on the business outcomes for the campaign? Is it reaching the audience that you want to reach? I think, if you look at, I'm not going to throw out loads of stats here because I'm sure other people do that far better than I can, but total ad investment into, total global ad investment this year is 1.1 trillion. It's projected to be 40 billion on CTV and about 136 billion on linear. Now, yes, some of those linear budgets will naturally shift to CTV, but actually it's that $500 billion that's going to 5 tech companies, social budgets, search budgets, online video budgets. That's the opportunity for CTV. And we're already seeing a lot of SMEs, but also digital advertisers lean into the platform and lead into the channel. So I think that's and for them it's far more cost effective, right? Because the barrier to invest into CTV or TV as a whole is far lower. Not everyone has hundreds of thousands to buy a linear campaign, but they can find 50, 100 grand to invest in a CTV campaign. So that's where I think the cost efficiencies and whether something's working or not will really come to fruition.
At a basic kind of TV buying audience level, though, I think for certain audiences, CTV isn't expensive. It's actually really cheap.
Yeah.
For those younger audiences, it's like a tenth of the price, and also a lot of media owners are getting more flexible with some of their pricing depending on the kinds of content they've got. Because a big issue that we have, I'll talk about a bit more, but where you've got a lot of inventory around a specific event or show, that's actually really hard to sell out. So actually some of the big broadcasters are getting really creative now on their pricing around some of their biggest, you might think they're most premium, but actually they've just got so much inventory around it that then they have to do more clever things with pricing. So I think it's got a lot better.
I would also say too, I think CTV gets unfairly branded off CPM only. Right, that's an arrow, like a quiver of kind of weapons, if you will. But CPMs and CTV, I think generally are very niche targeting audiences. If linear TV could do that, which they can't, they'd probably charge the same CPMs. And I think, Ryan, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think in the UK, I think what is it, approximately $20 billion on linear TV and $1 billion on CTV. So you're talking, proportionally 5% of the total spend is in CTV. Yet if you actually look at the time spent in CTV, kind of like AVOD supported apps or any sort of ad supported CTV, it's much more than 5%. So I think there's definitely kind of opportunities there, but I think if you look at it purely from a CPM perspective, yeah, they don't necessarily match up. But again, I think it's all about, how do you complement linear TV, and exactly what you said, Caroline, what is that kind of mix, like the econometrics that you can kind of model out to prove the efficacy, the efficacy of it.
And I think that's it. It's down to audiences,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Because like,
Yeah.
if you're targeting, I mean, if any of my clients said we're going after all adults, I'd probably
Yeah.
ask a few questions. But you know, if you're going after a really niche audience, actually, when you calculate that wastage in linear, all of a sudden
Yeah,
it looks
exactly.
much more effective.
Yeah.
I hate to bring it up so early in the panel, but it's really about that becoming a full funnel channel, right? Not just the awareness side of it. Yeah, completely understand. Now, John, down the end, unusually quiet from what I've seen according to your LinkedIn posts.
We cut
So,
So far.
We cut his mic.
you share a lot of thoughts around what data points matter and what data points are still needed. So I thought I'd ask you about what data or proof points are needed to unlock more investment from advertisers and how they can
I
be
think it's
addressed.
intrinsically linked to the conversation you were just having around cost as well. So if you think about two sides of the equation and how CTV potentially opens up the market to a longer tail of advertisers who may not have considered TV before, that is a portion of incremental revenue can come from there. In that world, you've got to be able to demonstrate return on investment and effectiveness, much in the same way that brands that are spending with Meta and Google are very, very used to in that closed ecosystem. So they are used to cheap media that drives some kind of result, and can CTV deliver that as cost effectively? I think when we talk about CPMs, they can look very high. The reason that CPMs on digital display inventory are cheap is because it's shit, like it's bad media, but it drives some kind of result for a client at the end of it, at the lower end of the funnel. So you've got that side of the equation which requires good outcomes data, and I think largely through the use of MMMs, econometrics, that often struggle to bring out the effect of CTV for really boring reasons like inconsistent naming conventions, taxonomies, scale, which are super important. So that's a bit of a struggle. So really good data into those models, and a lot of work to be done globally on taxonomy. How boring is that in every place? On the other end of the scale, the equation is always around when you're looking at all those brands who have invested lots in linear, who are trying to drive reach cost effectively. The measurement question is intrinsically linked. So how do we measure consistently audiences across all of these increasingly fragmented platforms and providers to demonstrate to clients that shifting some money away from, let's say, traditional into CTV will drive them as cost effective or cheaper reach, cost per coverage point at the right CPMs. And without that data in the way that we need it in a independently measured third-party cross-media measurement system, that's really, really incredibly hard to do. It's really hard to make those arguments when you don't have the data to do it. When inherently we see stats all the time that say reach is declining in linear, we understand that it's not declining for the linear broadcasters, they're moving to watch in different ways, whether that's through catch-up or something else. But it's then really hard to bring those things together without the right tools and data sets, which is happening slowly. I'm old enough to remember Project Dovetail.
Yeah.
A long time ago. Do you want to get that? And now with things like Origin, that's looking increasingly good. Still not without its problems and issues in terms of what it is they're actually measuring, but there's a lot to unpick there. Not so unusually quiet, though, so I think.
Thank you. Chris, what's your view on this, and how are you kind of tackling some of these issues at TiVo?
Yeah, it's funny. I think if we had a drinking game about how many times we said measurement today, we'd all be drunk by 9:30. Is that probably about how it goes? So that's obviously the one. I think measurement is definitely the issue, but more eloquently, I'd say, is like we're speaking different languages. Like when you're going to a linear buying team or a brand that's buying predominantly linear TV, they're talking GRPs, TRPs, other metrics that literally aren't even spoken of when it comes to the CTV universe. I know Matt from Samsung was actually just kind of talking about some opportunities, so I think it's going to start to come together. But I think one of the things that's actually really fascinating to me is going to be the evolution of how linear TV becomes more digitized. And I think, John, this goes back to your point about kind of taxonomy and the boring things that, quite frankly, are critical. Because ultimately what's going to happen, I think, in the next 3 to 5 years is you're going to start to see a lot more linear TV become digital. For example, I'm going to use Freely, right? This is something that some people in this room probably aren't even that familiar with because it is relatively new, right? TiVo was one of the first operating systems to launch Freely, and Freely is owned by the UK PSPs. It is digital viewing linear TV. Whenever that becomes proficient and basically the kind of driving force of the way people watch linear/digital TV, we're going to have another acronym probably. But then essentially what it's going to do is it's going to start to have parity of how CTV is speaking right now. I think CTV has been speaking Klingon for the last couple of years. quite frankly. And whenever linear TV becomes kind of this digitized format, we're all going to be speaking much more similar language. Measurement will hopefully be a lot more easier because it'll be based off of, again, different taxonomies, buying points, bid request signals that are being sent, because most of it will be transacted programmatically. But that's going to take some time, right? I'm forecasting that it's going to be another 3 to 5 years until that starts to become a little bit more prolific. But it's starting now, and it's got to start somewhere. So I think it's getting to that point. But again, I think it's just different languages right now.
Can I just make one point on that, just very quickly? I think what's interesting is, if you think about any other media channel out there, TV is the only channel to have undergone digital transformation but remained on the same device. And that creates a lot of complexities when it comes to expectations, because people see it as TV, so we should be able to holistically measure, manage, target, and absolutely we should strive for that. But if you look at other channels like digital out of home or audio or print to digital, we're not always fixated on this, let's measure everything together. And I think because TV is the same device, it's a fundamentally different device, but it is the same device in some ways as well.
To pick up, I think that comes fundamentally back to making sure that the consumer experience of advertising on that device is good. And this is where I got mouthy on LinkedIn. Because of a disconnected ecosystem and because of practices that maybe aren't working in the best interests of brands, if we don't have that connected view, you end up with poor user experiences, like massively over-servicing frequency, potentially seeing conflicting or competing brands, which you would never get in linear, the way that's managed. So the importance comes down to making sure that people are having a good experience with that brand on that device, and that we're not saturating them with bad experiences, because that's not good for anyone, right?
Yeah, definitely. Luckily, we've got Katie here on the panel. So you manage nearly 20 brands across linear and streaming. And I was wondering what learnings you've taken from your experience with linear television when looking at ad sales for Discovery Plus.
Yeah, I think, we've always had a kind of mission, which is that TV advertising isn't broken in any way. It's a really good experience that people are used to. As you say, there's clash management from a brand's perspective. There isn't high frequency from a viewer perspective. It just works. And what you see with some kind of streamers is, far too high ad load. There is clashing. There's ridiculous frequency. The same ad can sometimes run twice. There's buffering, because actually you haven't got server-side ad insertion.
10 times.
Yeah, so that's always been the objective. It's actually much, much harder to deliver than anyone could possibly imagine when you're mixing direct and programmatic, because you aren't being sent the right data. So we have, or ad stitchers, we're trying to make sure that we kind of are getting all the right signals through, but that, we don't always get that information from some of our SSP partners, which means we can't 100% guarantee it at the moment, but that is absolutely our holy grail, is that we should have an ad experience on streaming which is at least as good as, if not better, than linear television, because actually you can actually get more relevant because you'll be able to target better. You can be more creative with some of the formats, but yeah, so that has to be our objective, is as at least as good as standard old school TV, and it can be better.
The promise of it is amazing.
It's
That's
amazing,
the point.
yeah. But it is really hard, honestly.
When I dove into this particular issue, you could point the finger at multiple different things, from using multiple SSPs, the programmatic to direct, to the agency setup being wrong, to trading considerations, for example. There are multiple. But it all leads down the road of, if we don't sort that stuff out and we can't pinpoint what the issues are, that's why advertiser trust and fundamentally revenue won't follow suit. Because if you can't make it, to your point, better or the same as where money needs to go from, that's the harder sell.
But I think that's why it's really important that we do collaborate, and there are, lots of sort of kind of either established relationships like Thinkbox and Barb. We need to make sure that we're all working with that, because there are some ways that we can try and get some of this to work better if we all agree on our approaches and how we're going to do it.
But I don't know, maybe the internal optimist in me is thinking, hey, maybe it's a good thing you're getting hit with the same ad 10 times in a row.
I haven't been to McDonald's in 7 years.
Whoa, hold on, hear me out. I got some logic to this. I mean, that means robots aren't stealing our jobs, all right? At least we know the tech isn't working correctly. So but I think it's a hell of a point, right? Clearly, there's a gap there, and I think you would never get that in traditional or linear TV, which is a safer kind of we'll call it a safe decision, right? And you know, this is not the first
But
time.
it does come back to efficiency
100%.
and
Yeah.
clients' budgets,
100%.
right? They're
Yeah.
not paying for someone to see their ad 10 times in the same
Yeah,
program.
yeah.
So,
But I go back to user experience. It's also a terrible user experience. And
Yeah,
to John's
yeah.
point, nobody wins in that
no,
scenario.
it's both. It's both.
So,
yeah.
It can be fixed because I haven't seen it since. So there you go.
Just your TV.
Yeah,
There's ways
my
to do
telly,
that, John.
yeah.
AI taking our jobs was a topic I was trying to avoid in this panel, so I'll move on from that. But some of the challenges that you just referenced are particularly important when it comes to sports, and of course on Discovery Plus we've got TNT Sports. So how are you addressing that when it comes to TNT Sports, and also how does TNT Sports fit into your connected TV strategy?
Yeah, so we have an interesting strategy in this market at the moment because Discovery Plus is the legacy kind of Discovery product, which is 100% unscripted. There's no scripted content on it at all. And then it's also the home of TNT Sports. So actually what you can say is it's full of really passionate users because we have like the biggest reality library in the UK. And so actually how you manage ad experience for those people is quite specific because we've got one of the longest session lengths because people binge hours and hours of this content, right? Sport is something obviously completely different. It's live and we do successfully replace all of the ad breaks on our TNT sports channels with dynamically inserted ads, and that is unbelievable. The way that we use it from a streaming perspective is it increases loyalty. People are less likely to churn because they've got their favourite sports, but also it's about super serving those fans. Again, it comes back to the passion point. So in the Olympics, we showed every single second of every single sport was available on Discovery Plus. On the recent Champions League, the kind of new format, it's got a really sexy name, which I can never remember, which is like Day 8 or something, which is when 18 teams all competed, 18 matches all played at the same time at 8 o'clock on like the 29th of January. And we showed all of those games live at the same time and nothing fell over. So I think, there's a lot of really good work that's being done, but it's just how we make sure that the user experience and the advertiser experience is kind of as premium as that. So it makes things exciting.
And AI can't replace sports, ever.
AI can't replace sports, no. No, but actually what's interesting, we've got timeline markers on TNT Sports. So if you come in slightly late, you can already see what's happened. You can go back and look at if you've missed a goal, you can go back and find the goal. With the 18 games, we had goal alerts coming from every other match, so you could switch between matches. So an AI is helping to surface those events and in real time, right? So there is a role for it, right? But it's how you use it.
I think sports is an interesting point because I'm obviously coming at this from the agency point of view, but when we're looking at our AV campaigns and specifically on linear, sports kind of remains one of those golden tickets for driving incremental reach on linear. It's one of those things where people who, might not tune into linear at all will watch live. Exactly. And so actually the argument becomes, why wouldn't they do the same across connected channels as well?
We've got about 30% incremental viewing to TNT channels on Discovery Plus. So, people have access to both. Pretty much, there are some people who only have access to the app, but the app is ubiquitously available on every single, set-top box and dongle, so you can watch it. It's viewable everywhere. And I think for a lot of people, it has to be a second screen experience. But no, it's really interesting.
So sports rights is one content type that Connected TV is kind of looking at for future growth, but of course the other one is fast channels. Now, Ryan, LG is a key player in the fast channel market, obviously with its launch of its own LG One channel, but then also some quite significant licensing deals there with some of the studios like Sony, NBC. So where do you see fast fitting into the future of connected TV?
Yeah, it has a huge future. I think the US have been a couple of years ahead of Europe when it comes to fast. We, as you said, we have LG channels, which is available in 29 markets, and that's a free fast service. We have up to 150 channels, and it doesn't cost anything, right? We know that consumers like free TV. We've seen many stats and slides of the shift to free streaming, the shift to ad tiers. So we know that consumers like free TV. And they're used to seeing ads. And I think the fast channels, they serve a distinct purpose, right? It's that kind of lean back experience as opposed to kind of like, hey, I've turned on my TV. We know it takes on average 11 minutes to choose what you want to watch. But fast is that kind of similar to linear. You can flick through the channels and stop and watch something that you see that takes your fancy in that given moment. And I think that's where the quality comes in. So we've seen already in the last 12 months a lot of launches of new fast channels. We carry and distribute those channels on behalf of our content partners. And as you say, we have also launched LG One and LG Spotlight, which are our own fast channels. And the key thing is the quality of the content. I think 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the quality within fast was questionable. We now see the likes of Sony and NBC and Lionsgate and Fremantle all lean in, and other broadcasters as well leaning into fast. And so that's demonstrating that there's this kind of need from the consumer, and obviously that produces an opportunity for advertisers. I think the IB announced last year that this year 68% of advertisers are going to start to invest more in fast. And so that, I think, presents, as I said, great opportunities for the advertiser, but also monetization opportunities for the content owner, who would now effectively, through fast, have a new revenue stream to distribute and monetize that content, which perhaps before they didn't have that opportunity.
Yeah.
I want to kind of pose a question, though. Like, I'll throw this out because it's funny you make this comment, Ryan, and I completely agree with you. I remember I think I sold my first FAST campaign in my previous role in 2019, right? And the thing that I really want to jump on is the fact that you said the quality of content is evolved. And it absolutely has. But I think it's also super subjective because, again, we're talking about like a lot. Like I used to have like a lot of conversations with buyers around, oh, hey, that's not good quality content. I don't want my brand around that. But only because they subjectively thought it wasn't good quality, yet it was always content that was historically on linear TV. It might not necessarily be a first run. It wasn't live sports at that point. So it has evolved. But I'd be curious to hear from an agency's perspective about that subjectiveness, because my argument was always, you've got somebody watching this, right? You're able to buy it programmatically. You know that TV screen is on. You know somebody's likely there. You don't actually know for exact if they're sitting on the couch, but you know that opportunity is showing up when the TV is on. Why is that conversation around quality content? Is that still there? Do both of you, Caroline and John, do y'all see that right now from a FAST perspective?
I think it depends massively on the brand that you ask. There are certain advertisers who care enormously about the context of the shows they show up next to. I mean, I always use Apple as a fabulous example of someone who obsesses over the quality of the shows that they're next to. I used to buy TV airtime for Curry's PC World, who bought really cheap kind of daytime airtime, and occasionally an Apple product would be featured in the ad, and Apple had total rights of refusal over all the shows, and that spot list would come back to you, 85% of it scored out. And you go back and say, there's an 100% premium you've got to pay to do this, and they would do it every single time, because they really genuinely care about where they show up. You can't say it hasn't worked for them. One of the number one brands in the world, right? There are other brands that don't care because they're, if you look at the world of DRTV historically, that's what their airtime is for. Sit back, relax airtime that you might not be super engaged with, but that you could serve high frequency against during the daytime. People might be more likely to pick up the phone back in the day or pick up Google as it is likely now. So it depends on the advertiser massively, but there is a huge tranche of advertisers that probably care more about it actually, if anything.
I agree. Depends on the brand, but I'd also say depends on the campaign and the campaign objective, because there are some campaigns that you're working on that are like, I want this to be a moment in culture. And that means that appearing, even if it's the linear equivalent of the Rugrats movie at 3 a.m, that's not going to create a moment in culture. So to that end, I think it's just really subjective.
FAST does serve, a purpose in terms of targeting those hard-to-reach audiences, right? The more diverse audiences or special interest audiences that just can't be reached in many streaming environments or linear environments. And so I think when brands look holistically about making sure that their campaigns are as diverse as possible and reaching those audiences, I think FAST does kind of meet those requirements.
Yeah,
and I think if you can if it's demonstrable that it can add incrementality to a plan, harder to reach audiences cost effectively versus what can be done elsewhere, then many advertisers are going to buy it. They care about the reach and efficiency that those GRPs or TVRs are going to get them across their mix.
Yeah, I totally agree. And thinking more about your point around subjectivity, what I would say is I don't believe it's the subjectivity of the TV buyer. If
Yeah.
if it is their own personal subjectivity, then they probably shouldn't be doing that job. Because actually, you know, as an agency, you are an agent for a brand. And therefore, you know, I think it's the point that it's subjective to the brand. But, you know, the best TV buyers will be grounded in data, and certainly everyone that I've ever worked with, I don't think puts that personal lens on it, at least.
I've got a list of names for you. Let's go. Let's take this offline.
So it's not just kind of new content types, but there's also a couple of new innovations coming into the space that I want to focus on before we finish off. We're rapidly running out of time. And the first of those is new and newish formats. So we have pause ads, shoppable ads, product placement, which has been around for a while, but it's slightly developing. And I was wondering, Caroline, if the advertisers are kind of accepting these new ad formats, or is there a bit of hesitation around the use of those?
So I think in short, advertisers are definitely accepting them, but I think again it depends on the brand, and these products have got to align to what the brand is hoping to achieve. So I'll give you an example, which is kind of beginning of the summer last year, we won the Ecotone account, which is a group of brands, sustainable brands. One of them is Clipper, tea bags. And their whole positioning is about like well-being in nature and kind of taking a moment to pause to appreciate nature, which obviously goes well with a cup of tea. And, you know, a big part of their kind of latest plan is we bought pause screen ads because A, what better moment to make a cup of tea, but B, it just was about inspiring people to kind of go and stand in your garden for a minute and listen to the birds, you know, take that pause. And what happened was really, really interesting, because for the first time in probably about 15 years in my career, I started getting messages from my friends saying, was this ad you? And I think it was because, you know, it was a newer format, it was a bit different. Like, honestly, I had this flurry of WhatsApps going through, and I was like, yes, it was great. But the point was, it was that marriage of the brand, the campaign, and it being this slightly newer format. And it was a really nice format. It didn't interrupt people. They'd already paused.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, yeah, I think it's got to be the right fit. But when it is, why wouldn't brands go for it?
Yeah, sounds like a perfect match. And I think that's probably one of the concerns that you're having when it comes to streaming, is that you ultimately want people to stay on the platform and continue watching content. So those pause ads are a really great way of displaying that advert but not interrupting the viewing experience.
Yeah. And other non-interruptive ads. I mean, we sort of replace the ad breaks where our feeds on Discovery Plus are the same as the ones that go out linear, so 1 to 4. But from, you know, we've then got all this other content that we are trying to look to monetize. And, you know, actually with some of our sports rights, you really don't want to be going away to an ad break, like some of the cycling, or, you know, or you want to be able to do kind of a mixture of formats, and it's just trying to work out the best way of delivering that, but also, you know, how much demand is there going to be for some of those formats, because it's going to take special creative. So there's a balance there, definitely. I think, but non-interruptive as well, especially when you're an SVOD. You know, we do have a luxury, as long as someone's obviously prepared to pay, that we're quite happy to take all the ads out. So, and that we're seeing that a lot with Max, which is our kind of version of Netflix, which won't come to here until next year. But with that, where you've got, you know, things like White Lotus, you know, the Penguin, for example, in the US, the Penguin was just sponsored by one brand. There was not a single other advertiser that appeared in any of the first run of the Penguin in the US. Now, if you're prepared to pay for that, that's absolutely fine, right? So I think there's a lot of different things you can do.
I think the sort of creativity that can be born out of this kind of new era of formats and CTV is great, because to both these points, when you do something interesting and creative, people sit up and notice, and they text you and say, was that you? Whereas so much advertising is wallpaper, frankly, right? That it's really exciting, but it all needs to be built with the user experience in mind, and not what we think would be great for advertisers, because those two things often don't gel. So I was having another conversation on LinkedIn with someone who decried it's the era of performance TV, which is called DRTV, guys, it's been around a long time. And the suggestion was we could have ads that then buzzed your phone so that you could go straight to store. And I was like, what a horrible user experience when you're shoveling chocolate into your face on the sofa at night. Like, nobody wants that level of creepiness and weirdness. And I know it sounds great from an attribution point of view, but all this stuff has to be built with user experience at the heart of it. Otherwise, it will fail to resonate.
And I just go on, Chris, go on.
No, and I'll say it quickly, but like, because I think this also feeds into both of us, and it's, to me, one thing that I think of too in the CTV space is it also has to be scalable, right? We talk about this concept of, again, like, hey, it's great to have a really unique, opportunity like that pause ad. Is that scalable, right? Is that really going to get us from the $1 billion to the $5 billion to the 10? No, right? Is it going to help get us part of the way there? Yeah, probably. But like, I go back, and I think a lot of the smart TV operating systems are thinking about homepage ads as an opportunity. And I don't know if you're going to go this way, Ryan, but like, this is something that I think of where it's like, I've never seen anybody turn a TV on with remote control with their cell phone in hand at the same time. I've never seen anybody. If somebody has, send me a photo. But like, that doesn't mean, but to your point, John, it doesn't mean you just jam any ad on that homepage. I think it's then how do you think about like, what is a good user experience that could then bring other non-media and entertainment brands to that ecosystem and to that opportunity. And that, you think about scale, all the smart TV manufacturers have that, right? I think that creates an opportunity, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight either.
But primarily, it's not an interactive screen, and that's what we kind of have to have. Once you've found the program, you want to put that remote away and leave it alone. You don't want to be picking it up and fiddling around with the screen. It's not a nice environment to navigate, so that's the reality.
Well, you say that.
I know.
No, but absolutely. I just want to touch on a couple of points. Creativity and user experience, absolutely. Like, as an OEM, we have first and foremost the responsibility to our customers who buy these TVs to give them a really great experience, to help them find content. And we do that by supporting our kind of streaming partners and publisher partners, because we all know discoverability of content is a huge challenge for the industry. But we have to also remember there's a captive audience there, I think the fact we are a carousel unit, which is almost half the size of the screen, and you see that when you turn on the LG device. There's probably not been a more exciting ad unit or ad format in the last sort of 15, 20 years. If you think about where it is, its location, what you can do, the functionality. I agree with you, John. It's like no one wants to go through to a microsite, but we see media and entertainment brands really leaning into that format to promote their content, discoverability, streaming. We also see brands really seeing that this is it's often the first ad that someone will see when they turn on the TV, and it's often could be the last, right? Not everyone turns the TV on and goes into ad-funded formats or ad-funded streaming. So they might be doing they might be gaming, they might be doing a workout video, and so sometimes that's the only opportunity. And I think it grabs it. You're the attention expert, so for a fact that there's a lot of attention there that home screen carousel unit kind of generates. And so it's in a really exciting area, and it's something that we as LG are really kind of pushing forward and seeing brands really lean into it.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because it's actually going to be my final question. And I was going to call it a new retail space, and actually it's not new at all. It's your TV screen that has always been there. So really exciting opportunity for further CTV revenue growth. We are out of time, I'm afraid, but I want to thank all of my panellists for joining me today, and thank you for a very interesting and insightful panel.